Hi everyone, Quiveen here from the comfort of my kitchen. In today's video, we are going to take a look at a few conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn. You may remember from a previous video, a reasonably recent video, we took a look at a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 2080. So we're going to very quickly review that conjunction here. There's Jupiter and Saturn. We're not on the right date, but that's okay. We will remove the atmosphere and the ground so that they don't get in the way while we move through time to hopefully bring Saturn and Jupiter just a little bit closer. And there we go. So this is a very close conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter. We can see their moons together in the sky. We can just barely, you might just barely see Saturn's rings. We might need to zoom in a little bit closer to see Jupiter and Saturn, the rings, the moons, all together. So there's a whole video about this conjunction, Saturn and Jupiter in 2080, if you want to take a look at that. However, a helpful commenter pointed out that similar conjunctions occurred within 20 years of this one. So we're going to jump back from 2080 to 2060 and see how close the conjunction is there. If there are any interesting events that any of you would like to see, all you need to do is comment them and I am happy to take a look. So this conjunction in 2060, it's another great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn. They're not quite as close, of course, as we can see here. We can just about see Jupiter's moons, Saturn's moons not as much, but they are fairly close together in the sky. This doesn't happen. I don't believe it happens every 20 years exactly, but there was another conjunction 20 years before this, still of course looking into our future. So here we are in 2040 and we'll zoom out a little bit just in case Jupiter and Saturn aren't getting too close in the sky. We'll move through time. They've both just been very close to their opposition because of the reversal of movement that we were able to see just there. So we can see how they get closer together and then start to move seemingly in the opposite direction. And coming back, there we go. So this change in direction, the retrograde motion really of Jupiter and Saturn, it does occur when they are close to opposition. All of the planets further from the sun than the Earth have a period of time in our sky where they look like they're moving in the wrong direction. But here we go, still in 2040, there is Saturn and Jupiter. Again, fairly close in our sky, not as close as they were in 2080. Or not as close as they will be in 2080. We went into the future, we're traveling back in time, so referring to things, the temporal grammar gets a little bit complicated. Here we are in 2020 and we don't even need to change the date by that much, by the looks of it. There is a much closer conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, much more similar to the one that we will be seeing in 2080. So this one, of course, has already happened back in 2020. So we can see a fairly regular conjunction, what seems to be fairly regular every 20 years over this period from 2020 to 2080. However, it's not exactly 20 years. As we can see here, we're now in the 12th month of 2020 in December, whereas when we see this conjunction in 2040, it's the 10th month. So the actual length is a little different to 20 years. If we go back again further into the past, and I will thank again the helpful commenter who gave me these years so that we could look at these conjunctions. Here is Saturn, here is Saturn. I'm not seeing Jupiter just yet. There it is. So we'll move through time and see how close together we can get them in 1226. They're doing a very similar thing as what we saw in 2040, where they're getting close together, they're entering retrograde motion. That retrograde motion has to change again before we get the actual conjunction. And again, this looks like a great one in 1226. Even better, I must say, even better than the one in 2080. So it's a pity, of course, that this one is in the past, but we can see how close together they look in the sky. We haven't seen, through all of these dates, an occultation of Saturn by Jupiter, which would look very impressive. But this mix of moons, seeing the rings and the stripes and everything so close together. In fact, we'll pause time so that things don't drift out of view, so that we can zoom in right between them. There we go. The great red spot, the stripes, the rings. We can see the largest moon of Saturn and various smaller moons. We can see Jupiter's Galilean moons. We'll have to zoom out a little bit to catch Callisto. But that is a fantastic view. 1226. Way in the past, that may have been the best conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. What we're going to do now is we'll come back to 2020, just a little bit closer to the modern day. Well, quite a bit closer to the modern day, really, almost 1,000 years closer to the modern day. We'll zoom back out, we'll find Jupiter and Saturn again, and we'll watch them from their conjunction. Of course, we'll have to move forward practically to the end of the year. We can see them getting closer together and then changing direction as they go through that retrograde motion. There we are. So there's Saturn and Jupiter very close together in a conjunction. We're not going to see conjunctions like this every year, simply because Jupiter and Saturn are both on their own journeys around the sun. So we can see here as we move through time, they move apart from one another, then they go through their retrograde motion. They're still really separating in space. Saturn is making its own journey around the sun, and so is Jupiter. Of course, the stars that we're seeing them in front of are also changing because we're orbiting the sun, and there we go. Saturn passed by on the opposite side of the sun again. We're moving through years, and Saturn and Jupiter are only getting further apart. We're getting closer and closer to this year, and Jupiter is really lagging behind Saturn now. Saturn seems to be making much quicker progress across the sky. Of course, Saturn does orbit the sun slower than Jupiter. What's really happening here is not too complicated, but it does involve 3 different planets, our rotation, our orbit around the sun, and the different speeds of these orbits. But I think we're coming through to 2026 now. We're coming back to the modern day. And if we zoom out, we should see Jupiter pretty far from Saturn. Not quite on opposite sides of the sky yet, but very far apart. We'll be seeing their oppositions at practically opposite times of the year. We'll keep pushing forward, but of course we've got a long journey ahead of us here. There's Saturn moving behind the sun again. As we move through here, especially now that we're looking a little bit closer at Saturn, you can see those changes in direction, that little bit of retrograde motion, which occurs with planets that are further from the sun than we are. So Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Saturn is quite far from the sun, so its retrograde motion is quite slow. It happens over the course of several days, so that makes it a little bit harder to notice than the retrograde motion we see with planets like Mercury and Venus that are so much closer to the sun. Here we are in 2030. We're halfway between, nearly halfway between the 2 conjunctions, one in 2020 and one in 2040, and now we're seeing Jupiter and Saturn practically on opposite sides of the sky. They're very nearly opposed to each other. So we've got 10 more years, which hopefully we will get through fairly quickly. We're still going day by day, so we can see these changes so that things don't jump too drastically. We'll move through, it shouldn't take too long before we come back around to the conjunction. We'll stop at around 2035 as well, when we should start seeing Jupiter and Saturn getting closer together. And as we're moving through time here, we're skipping past loads of interesting conjunctions. For example, there's the moon very close to Saturn. Saturn's moving past the other planets as it comes in towards the sun, or appears to come in towards the sun from our perspective. So there we go. Saturn and Mars and Mercury, triple conjunction coming up in 2032. There's Saturn and Venus very close together, way too close to the sun for us to see from here on Earth. We had Saturn coming very close to Uranus there as well. We'd have to zoom in a little bit, I think, to see where Neptune is, because Neptune is so faint. There is Well, there would be, yeah, a reasonable conjunction of Saturn and Mercury there as we come through to 2033. So we're zooming ahead into the future here. And I'm sure we're missing some very interesting events. There's always interesting things happening in the sky, but we're going forward again to 2040 to see that conjunction. We're nearly there, yeah, 2035 now. So we should start seeing Jupiter being closer to Saturn. There we go. The cycle is repeating. We'll stay zoomed out a little bit here so we can watch Saturn. We'll stabilize our view on Saturn so that we can watch Saturn slowly catching up to Jupiter. And because of the alternating retrograde motions, it will look like Saturn and Jupiter get a little close together. Oh, there's a great conjunction of Saturn and Mars, another one with Saturn and Mercury, the moon going past. There's always interesting things in the sky. It's hard not to stop and take a look. Great conjunction there of Saturn and Venus. But here we come. Oh, Saturn and Regulus passing very close together right around its retrograde motion. So that's very cool. And there we go. Saturn and Jupiter barely on opposite sides of the sun from each other there, as you can see, getting closer and closer. You might also see, as we look at the background, this is a real planetary parade. They're marching across the sky, but we can see Saturn there being close to Regulus in the sky. There's Jupiter moving past Regulus in the sky, Spica, Antares, all of the constellations that are on the ecliptic, what we would call the zodiacal constellations. That's where these planets move. So of course the planets having conjunctions or occultations with those bright stars is common, more common than, of course, anything that's in a different position. And there we go, back to 2040. I hadn't noticed how close to the sun this was, so this might be a difficult conjunction to see, but there we go. That is the whole cycle from 2020 to 2040, as well as 2060, 2080 and 1226. Several close conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn. We're not going to get to see these for decades, of course. We've got a couple of decades to go, decade and a half, before we get through to Saturn and Jupiter's next conjunction. But I hope you are looking forward to it. I hope you enjoyed what you've seen here. If you did like this video, then please do like it. And if you enjoy this content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also read this information on my website, quebeanscontent.ie. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you back here next time.